Something has shifted in the way SCS Software talks about ETS2 and ATS. If you've been following the update videos you've made, you probably felt it too. The tone was different. 2025 was packed with content, one announcement after another that felt heavy, important but also a little confusing. At first, it all looked familiar. New trucks, new regions, engine updates, but also some very bold announcements. The more I covered these updates, the more it felt like something wasn't quite adding up. Now don't get me wrong, I loved these ideas, still I couldn't help but wonder. Why are we suddenly talking about drivable cars? Why is Project Coaches back after years of silence? And why is so much effort going into creating or reworking these scenic areas where you can't even fit your truck? And then a few days ago, I rewatched a clip of Pavel Šebor talking about something that seemed small, announcing that they're going to rework the in-game garages. It was a tiny 2-minute window in a much longer stream, but in those 2 minutes that followed, he used the word that finally connected the dots for me: Sandbox. I don't think 2026 is important because of a single update or a specific DLC. I think it's important because after everything announced in 2025, we finally have enough pieces to understand what these games are meant to become. When I think back to 2025, it doesn't feel like a normal year of updates. Some of the things announced simply weren't on anyone's short-term wish list, and some of them weren't expected at all. Cars, for example. For many years, they were a topic that came up in theory, something people asked for but never seriously expected to see anytime soon. And same goes for Project Coaches. People asked about it, but nobody imagined they would actually come, let alone be announced last summer. These weren't small additions, and they were definitely not rushed. What stood out to me was how these ideas were introduced. Carefully framed projects, announced with confidence and clearly planned far ahead. Even the timing mattered. When we saw the systems being talked about before they were fully visible, foundations laid before outcomes were even shown, the kind of development you only do when you know exactly what you're building towards. The map reworks were also a big signal to me. Taking existing regions and rebuilding them with a level of detail that suggests they're meant to be experienced, not just passed through. So when I look back at 2025, I don't see it like a year of features or big releases. I actually see it as a year of preparation. Pieces being put in place, systems being aligned, and decisions made with a longer horizon in mind. And once you start seeing it that way, a natural question follows. What kind of world are they preparing us for? Now, I've said this before, but the map is now the most valuable feature SCS has. Not a specific truck or a single DLC, but the world itself. Somewhere along the way, the focus quietly shifted, and you can hear it in the way people talk about these games now. The conversations aren't really about horsepower or cargo weight anymore, they're about places. A stretch of road that feels right, maybe a city rework that suddenly feels alive or matching the real life. A view you slowed down for or stopped to take a photo, even when you're already late on a delivery. That doesn't happen by accident. Over the years, the playable world in ETS2 and ATS hasn't just grown, it became more dense, more intentional, and more detailed. There are a lot of roads now that you just want to drive through. Scenic routes that you feel like you need to park by and take a screenshot. I've had plenty of sessions where I just load into the game, I look at the job list, and I just don't pick one, I just end up driving. And whenever I do, I'm chasing these things that I never used to. I want to see how a reworked region looks at night, or how the light hits the landscape at sunset, what's hidden just beyond the route the GPS wants to take me. And judging by the comments I'm seeing, I'm not alone. More and more players are saying the same thing. They don't really care what they drive, truck, car, coach. What they care about is being in the world. At that point, the map stops being just a backdrop for gameplay. It becomes being the reason you load into the game in the first place. And when the world itself reaches that level of importance, the changes we saw in 2025 start to feel a lot more connected. But it also brings us back to a question that's hard to ignore. If the world is now the main attraction, what happens to the core experience of these games? And I guess this is where that shift starts to feel uncomfortable for some people, because ETS2 and ATS were not built as open-ended driving worlds, they were built around a very specific fantasy, being a trucker. For years, everything in these games served that idea. The trucks were the center of the experience, so when the focus starts to widen, when cars, coaches and pure exploration begin to take up more space, it's hard not to wonder what's being pushed on the side. And I've seen that concern come up again and again, in our Discord channel, in the video comments, and I kinda felt it too. There's a fear that by trying to be more than a trucking game, ETS2 and ATS might lose the very first thing they do better than anyone else: And I guess for players who've been around for a long time, those are valid questions, because this isn't just about features, it's about identity. At this point, I did not have an answer, just the sense that the direction was deliberate, and whatever SCS Software was building, it was much bigger than I could have comprehended. The moment when everything finally started to make sense to me was from a live stream. Pavel Šebor, the CEO of SCS Software, was talking about something that sounded almost insignificant at first, a rework of in-game garages. On its own, that doesn't sound like a huge thing, a quality of life change, a bit of immersion maybe, something nice but easy to overlook. But as he kept talking, it became clear that this wasn't just a small idea at all. He described the garage rework as a foundation, the starting point for changes that go far beyond where you park your truck. He talked about believability, about how the world needs to make more sense for the kind of content they're adding. If you own a car, it shouldn't exist in the menu, it needs a place. Somewhere you get to leave it before getting into your truck and starting your workday. And then he said something that connected everything I've been trying to understand all year. He talked about building a sandbox experience, a world where you don't just jump between roles through menus, but exist in the space as a person, sometimes a trucker, sometimes a driver, sometimes just someone moving through the world. In that moment, a lot of the confusion around 2025 disappeared. Cars, coaches, scenic roads or landmarks, they were groundwork, pieces of a framework designed to support more than just a delivery loop. Once you start looking at ETS2 and ATS through that lens, the idea becomes believable. It becomes practical. It's not just about removing the structure, it's about filling in the space between the structured moments. Let me explain. Think about how the most sessions start today. You load the game, you open the job market, you pick a destination. Everything in between is optimized to get you from point A to B. In a sandbox-style driving game, that changes. You might start a session without immediately selecting a job. You leave your house in a car, you drive to your garage, you park, you get into your truck. The work is still there, the hauling still matters, but now it's framed by a world that continues to exist outside of it, if you will. Finishing a long haul doesn't immediately cut you to a menu, you bring the truck back, you park it, maybe you take a different vehicle out, maybe you just drive. Suddenly distance feels different, not because the map got bigger, but because your presence in it continues. And it makes sense now. This is why SCS have been putting a lot more emphasis on atmosphere lately, on lighting, on reworks that add character. When the goal isn't just to deliver cargo, the journey stops being a filler, it becomes the point. So why does 2026 matter so much? At this point, it's important to say this clearly. Trucking isn't being left behind. If anything, it's becoming more important. In the middle of all this talk about cars, coaches, and world building, SCS continues to invest heavily in the core of these games. Classic trucks, physics improvements, DirectX 12, deeper simulation, sound designs. A sandbox without an anchor feels empty. And in ETS2 and ATS, that anchor is still the truck. The difference now is the context. Trucking will no longer exist in isolation. It will exist in a world that's finally being treated as more than a backdrop. And that's why 2026 matters, because it starts building the future on the foundations laid in 2025. Judging by what I've seen, I think ETS2 and ATS are growing into long-term driving platforms, places where hauling cargo, driving a truck, still gonna be the spine of your experience, but it won't be the only way you get to experience it. And this kind of evolution takes time. It requires patience, trust, and willingness to let these games grow up without forgetting where they came from. And when that day finally arrives, when ETS2 and ATS will check all the boxes for a sandbox experience, we can sit down, look back and decide whether it was all worth it. Before I go, I just want to say thank you. 2025 was a big year, not just for these games, but for this channel as well. The discussions, the comments, the disagreements, all of it pushed these videos to be better. I'm genuinely grateful for everyone who watched, supported, and took the time to think along with me. And heading into 2026, I'm excited. Thanks for being part of my journey, and as always, until the next time, stay safe on the road and keep on trucking. Cheers!